Welcome to the Kennedy Report, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kennedy Hall. Pope Francis has betrayed Cardinal Zen. I'm not saying this lightly. You know me, I'm not one to be sort of cavalier about speculating about the Pope. I obviously report on these things when it's necessary for my job and so forth. But unless something is clear and obvious, I don't usually speculate about the Pope's intentions or something like that. But this seems pretty clear that what the Pope is doing to Cardinal Zen it's a tragedy. It's massively egregious what is happening. So we're going to get to an article written by Liz Yore. She's a friend of mine, a writer for LifeSite. Well, she's a lawyer primarily, but she contributes to LifeSite News and things like that as well. I had the pleasure of meeting her down in Florida. That was fun. In any case, she wrote an article for LifeSite. It was published today. It's great. We're going to go through it here. It's incredible. She nails it with what she said about basically what has happened here. And having the legal mind that she has, she was really qualified, I believe, to talk about it. And here's what she said. So she said, Pope Francis has betrayed Cardinal Zen in his hour of need. And just before we get to that, please like this video, subscribe to this channel. Click the links in the description to see how you can support us. You can buy my books. You can donate. You can be a patron. All the different ways that you can support the podcast, the YouTube show. If you could do that, that's great. Thank you to everyone who has. And it's been a pleasure being able to share this stuff with you for the last few months. And I'm so heartened by the fact that it keeps growing and everyone is interested in it. So in any case, Pope Francis has betrayed Cardinal Zen in his greatest hour of need. She started it off with Confucius, which is interesting, actually. She says, as Confucius said, a great man is hard on himself, a small man is hard on others. Today, on Monday, September 19th, the beloved and Reverend 90-year-old Cardinal Joseph Zen, the Bishop Emeritus of Hong Kong, will walk into West Kowloon Court and face trial on charges of failing to legally register the 612 Humanitarian Relief Fund. This fund was established to provide financial assistance to those in the democracy and freedom movement who protested the CCP crackdown in Hong Kong in 2019. Zen and 5 other defendants have pleaded not guilty to charges of collusion with foreign forces, a violation of China's newly imposed national security law implemented in Hong Kong. So just for a little context here, Cardinal Zen is 90 years old. They're bringing a 90-year-old man to criminal court because of a legal technicality about the nonprofit status of an organization. And Cardinal Zen is an honest man. I'm sure he registered it. But in the communist nation, if they decide you didn't do something, then you didn't do it. So it's probably a farce anyway. She continues. And she says, Zen has been a vocal opponent of the Vatican's 2018 secret pact with the Chinese government, which was organized by Cardinal McCarrick, by the way. He has called the agreement an incredible betrayal, as well as a suicide pact and shameless surrender. Not surprisingly, Zen's description of the Vatican Pact as sending the flock into the mouths of the wolves was immediately proven apt once the agreement was signed and the Chinese government began to destroy churches, arrest priests, and shut down religious services. Shocker, you shake hands with communists and they do something to harm you. I can't believe it. Zen foresaw that the secret pact would kill the underground faithful Catholic Church in China. He feared that those underground bishops and priests who refused to register with the CCP-run Catholic Patriotic Association, which is a communist church, it's not real, would be harassed, arrested, detained, and disappeared. Not surprisingly, this is exactly what has happened. The Francis CCP deal has driven the underground church further underground. A little background here. So the Chinese Patriotic Association, the Chinese church, is a church that was actually officially in schism for the longest time. And there's a lot of history here that actually pertains to canon law and Marcel Lefebvre and what schism actually is, and this church and Cardinal McCarrick. It's all intertwined. But real quick, historically, it was custom in different places. There were different customs in different places about how you would appoint bishops. Customarily, in some places, it was the custom that you would always tell the Pope who you were appointing before you did. In many cases, it was custom that the Pope would maybe say, I would like you to appoint so-and-so. And in some places, based on geographical distances and so forth, it was actually totally fine to just appoint a bishop. And then once it had been done, you would tell the Pope, and that way. Anyway, in the 1917 code, it was sort of with the custom where it was kind of discretionary. In the 1950s or late 40s, whenever it was, that was actually changed by Pope Pius XII. And the reason that it was changed is because he changed it so that you had to have official papal approval before going through with the consecration, in order that the Chinese church would not have bishops appointed that were communists. That was the intention. Good intention. And also, one would argue that at this time, global communication was really simple. And because of that, it wasn't difficult to get approval. So it wasn't like you had to wait months and months and months, or, you could send a telegram or a wire or even stuff internationally at this point, radio transmissions, shortwave. You could get information pretty quickly. So the idea is that if you change this canon law so that you have to have the Pope's permission, if, the patriotic church, so-called, just wanted to do it, they couldn't, and they would de facto put themselves out of communion with the Pope, because going against something like that with no grave reason, they were communists, no reason at all. Funny, fast forward, because Marcel Lefebvre was actually formed in the pre-50s seminaries and as a priest, and he was a bishop actually before that change. So when he went to consecrate the 4 bishops of the SSPX, 3 now, he made it very clear that it is not intrinsically part of the nature of consecrating bishops. You have to have papal approval beforehand, because it wasn't that way for centuries, and it was back and forth. And the intention of having the papal approval was that you would not consecrate bishops who were basically de facto excommunicated from the church. And in the 1980s, you had bishops who were approved by the Pope, appointed by Cardinal Baggio, who was the congregation for the prefect for the congregation for bishops, I think it was called, who was himself de facto excommunicated from the church because he was a Freemason. You see how this policy was flipped on its head to persecute a faithful Catholic, while it was used to uphold basically schismatic and de facto excommunicated Catholic bishops. In any case, what Cardinal McCarrick orchestrated, you remember him, was that the Chinese Patriotic Association, this pseudo-communist Catholic church, I guess they would have valid orders, but they're in schism de facto because they are not Catholic. The communists can't be Catholic. This basically Communist Party-run church is now, in the mind of Pope Francis, fully in communion in the church. But don't be going to those SSPX masses, because we're not sure how many communion points they get. But for sure, the Pope said, in fairness, the Pope has been fair to the communists and the SSPX. So I guess he's an equal opportunity communion giver, communion respecter. Anyway, continuing. And Liz Yor writes, despite the universal condemnation of the Vatican CCP Pact by religious freedom organizations. Oh, sorry, before I continue, like this video, subscribe to this channel. See, I remember to do it this time. Also, though, there has always been an underground church. So in China, it was seen until 2018 that the true Catholic Church in China was the underground church. And underground is a loose term, because in many places it depends on the tolerance of the local government. Right? So the true Catholic Church was the Chinese underground church, who would not be communist. And then there was the official Catholic Church. I don't know what this means for the faithful. I have no idea what it means for the faithful as far as their communion with the. I have no idea. That's a canonical nightmare. However, they kept the faith. They would not adhere to communism. They've been thrown under the bus, and now there's no support from Rome for the underground church, because now you have this official church, and you're expected to just be sort of, you're supposed to subsist within it, to take a term from Vatican II. You're supposed to just be absorbed into this communist church, even though you're an anti-communist, which is impossible. And whoever put together this pact, and the men who did it, it's absolutely criminal. They would have known that they would have had to have known that the underground Catholic priests would never have been okay. They've hastened their deaths. I mean, God's wrath be upon the people who organized this deal, because it is one of the most evil thing that's ever been done to Catholics in the history. It is one of the most evil things that has ever been done to Catholics in the church by the hierarchy in the history of the church. I mean that. you need to understand just how diabolical the Chinese communist regime is, okay? And how diabolical it is for the Pope of Rome to okay a deal that throws the faithful underground true Church of China under the bus and then implies that they should be absorbed by a communist church that will persecute them and destroy their lives. It is evil to a degree that is hard to articulate. Anyway, despite this universal condemnation of the Vatican CCP pact by religious freedom organizations, the ongoing surge in religious persecution, the Vatican renewed the agreement in 2020. In anticipation of the renewal, Cardinal Zen personally traveled to the Vatican to meet and plead with the Pope. Now, Pope Francis refused to meet with him. Maybe you'll remember this. This just came up here. This is an article saying he refused to meet with him. Okay. So basically Pope Francis did not meet with, at that time, the 88-year-old Cardinal Zen, who traveled during the whole, super difficult to travel COVID time. Okay. He only had like 48 hours he could spend in Italy before he had to get out and go back. I think, he had permission to leave for a bit from his communist overlords. And that's the same Cardinal. This is the same Pope Francis who will talk to celebrities and NBA basketball players, but he won't talk to one of his own cardinals who will be thrown in prison at the age of 90, whatever, to rot away by the communist government that Pope Francis supports. It's really bad. It's really bad. It's hard to, when you really follow the logic through, you realize it's wow. It's really, really, it's satanic. In any case, and the papal maximalists who want to, the types of guys who would explain away if Pope Francis was out there beating people with a stick in the street, and they'd say somehow that's the new evangelization. I don't know. Square this circle, and then talk to me about obedience. I don't understand this at all. In any case, should hide this window here. Excuse me. The article goes on. Once the deal was signed, the CCP began its Hong Kong crackdown on freedom and democracy by targeting and arresting the leaders of the freedom movement, which is led primarily by Catholics. Many were charged and jailed, including Jimmy Lai, or Lai, probably pronounced, founder of the pro-democracy newspaper Apple Daily, who remains in prison. The Vatican remains silent over this widespread attack on the democracy movement. It's just like the Vatican remains silent on the fact that Catholics were persecuted in countries because of the lockdowns. Anyway, because they embraced it, because they closed down the church. The bishops embraced the persecution of their own flock because they denied them their sacraments. So Cardinal Joseph Zen will now face the kangaroo court of the Chinese communists. These tyrants believe Zen's powerful and patriotic voice needs to be punished and silenced. As a beloved, humble, and saintly prince of the church, Zen should have the unwavering support of the Holy See. The Vatican should be issuing strong and condemnatory statements and protests against this unjust violation of rights. Instead, Bergoglio, Pope Francis, betrays his brother bishop. He mocks and abandons him in his hour of great need. This is a fact. This is not speculation. This is a fact. Here's the craziest part, though. Listen to this. So Pope Francis was asked by a journalist for Crux, sort of a centrist liberal Catholic outlet. It's leftist because they had permission to speak to the Pope. They don't let conservative outlets talk to the Pope. That would be risk of too much orthodoxy in those conversations. He was asked basically, literally, about Zen. Now with the trial going forward against Cardinal Zen, do you consider the trial against him a violation of religious freedom? And Pope Francis said, to understand China takes a century, and we do not live for a century. What does that even mean? The Chinese mentality is a rich mentality. When it gets a little sick, it loses its richness. It is capable of making mistakes. In order to understand, we have chosen the path of open dialogue. Blah, 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 blah. He goes on to talk about more dialogue. And here in the Vatican, there is dialogue commission. There's a dialogue commission that is going on, well chaired by Cardinal Parolin, who's a bad actor himself. And he is the person right now who knows the most about China and dialogue with the Chinese. So I guess Cardinal Parolin knows most about China, not Cardinal Zen. Because it is difficult, I do wish to qualify it. They are impressions, and I try to support the path of dialogue. Blah, 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 blah. Cardinal Zen is going to trial these days. That's all he says. Cardinal Zen's going to trials these days. Oh, Cardinal Zen's going to trial. Talks about dialogue again, dialogue again. Anyway, Pope Francis said, again in the interview, he said, qualifying China as undemocratic, I do not identify with that because it's such a complex country. So China's not a democracy, and there's problems with democracy, don't get me wrong, but China's not a democracy. It's Cardinal Zen is just going to trial. But don't worry, bro. Don't worry, guys. Don't worry. Cardinal Zen, he's just going to trial because we're dialoguing. As long as we dialogue with the Cardinal Parolin, who is not Chinese, but knows the most about China, but probably less than Cardinal Zen. But we won't talk about him because we meet with professional basketball players instead of cardinals of the church. We're dialoguing. And because we're dialoguing, we can be certain that the path of dialogue will lead to dialogue with China, which is a complex country, which takes a century to understand. But we do not have a century, so we can't understand it. But even though we can't understand it because we don't have a century, there is a man who understands it the best. By the way, we're in dialogue. This is what Pope Francis is doing. This is not speculation. We cannot say that the Pope does not know. We cannot say that he has not been presented with the information. This is a legitimate and egregious act by the Holy Father against a cardinal of the Catholic Church. And it is the type of thing that will damn your soul. You must pray for Pope Francis, because how are you going to stand in front of St. Peter and say, I decided not to help a bishop and I gave the communists free rein? That's insane. That's insane. That's remarkable. Continuing, there's a little bit left in the article. Well, basically, Liz is sort of opining. I'll read the last paragraph here. And she says, dialogue for dialogue's sake. She says, dialogue for dialogue's sake is an ideal scapegoat for Bergoglio. He elevates it to an ideal virtue, the Holy Grail above all others, allowing him to ignore sin, immorality, and evil. This is true. Consequently, dialogue for dialogue's sake never confronts and thus never holds the CCP accountable for its persecution, genocide, and violence against the people of faith. Dialogue is Bergoglio's sole magisterium, his beloved dogma, allowing him to abandon the tenets of the Catholic Church. Me and Joe Boca are going to do a little episode or 2 or 3, depending on how long it takes, on modernism. We're actually going to go through Pascendi Dominici Gregis by Pope Pius X, which almost nobody's ever read. I know this because I'm reading this. Even a lot of trads have never read it. A modernist is a very particular thing. Pope Francis is a modernist, but a modernist is a very particular thing. And it's important that Catholics actually understand what modernism is. And it's very specifically defined by Pope Pius X. And it's not helpful if even trads don't understand what it is and call everyone a modernist, because if they're not that, they're not a modernist, so anyway. But this is what Pope Francis is doing. This idea of dialogue is modernism 101. It's vital immanence. And basically, modernists champion the idea of the evolution of dogma. They believe that there is no way of knowing for certain some sort of revealed truth, because the religious sense comes from interiorly. So as the religious sense of the people changes, in order for the teachings of the church to be true, they have to reflect the truth of the interior collective. That's basically what a modernist believes. This is why you see, the surprises of the Holy Spirit. That's modernism. The church doesn't change her teaching, but her teaching evolves. No, it doesn't. It can be defined clearer, but it doesn't evolve into something different. That's impossible. Anyway, pray for Cardinal Zen, because what is happening here is remarkable. And, the Catholics out there who think that all you really have to do is sort of just take it on the chin and be humble and, don't fight, whatever. This is happening for a reason. That is true in certain moments in people's lives, but that is not Catholic history. The church is full of crusades and cristeros and martyrs who fight against tyranny. Obviously, there are stipulations wherein you have to decide whether or not it's worth it for you to fight in a given situation, whether or not you have the means to do so, whether or not you can win. I mean, these are all things you have to take into account. But it is a foolish and cowardly and effeminate position by many Catholics, many of them who call themselves traditionalists, who say that we are in no place to ever criticize the Pope. That's not church teaching. Thomas Aquinas is clear on that, as are many others. And it is foolish to believe that, just because the Pope is doing, we have to basically shut up and take it. That's not church teaching. No one is required to continually be abused by someone who has a power dynamic over them. No one is required to pretend that it's not an egregious act of terrible evil just because it's something the Pope has done. The Pope is a human being, and he is protected, of course, with divine help, in faith and morals and so forth. But his prudential application of political situations, he can sin and commit damnable sins just like anyone on earth. And Pope Francis has done that with how he's dealt with Cardinal Zen. I'm not his judge. I can't say his intentions and so forth, but the same way that I believe when a guy walks into a bank and pulls out a gun and robs the bank, I believe he probably wanted to rob the bank. Call me crazy. When Pope Francis avoids a question about a cardinal who's 90 years old, who's going to rot away in a jail cell being persecuted by Chinese communists, and when he refuses to meet with that man, when he makes the trip from China during the harshest time to travel in probably 100 years or more, when Pope Francis acts like that, I believe he probably didn't want to meet him. When Pope Francis sells out the Catholic Church in China to the communists, I believe he probably intended to do so. I mean, call me crazy. He metaphorically walked into the bank with the gun, took it out and said, "Give me your money." He probably wanted to walk into the bank and take out the gun and say, "Give me your money," because he probably wanted the money. It's pretty simple. So pray for Pope Francis, pray for Cardinal Zen, because hopefully he doesn't rot away in a jail cell, but he might. And pray that all the men involved in this in the Catholic Church repent, because if they don't, they'll burn in hell for all eternity. That's a fact. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, click the link in the description, subscribe, all those sorts of things. Especially click the notification bell, because I've got 5 kids, I got a full-time job and whatever. I'm a freelance author. So I kind of, I'll get the inspiration to record on my lunch break or in the middle of the night or something like that. And then I kind of air it whenever I can. So I don't always have this plan. It's sort of like the spur of the moment. I'm kind of spontaneous that way, if that makes sense. So if you click the notification bell, you'll know when I'm going to you'll know when I'm going to be streaming or playing this. This is a pre-recorded stream, playing this rather than having to wait for information about it. It'll actually just come up on your phone or on your computer. So just click that notification bell. This has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless.